Welcome back to the Career Profiles podcast on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. I'm your host, Sean, and this is part 4, the final part of the Teddy Atlas Career Profile. It's been an epic tale so far with some great stories around how Teddy Atlas got into boxing, his relationship with his father Theodore, his relationship with the likes of Cus D'Amato and Mike Tyson, his career moving forward with professional ballet dancers and movie stars, and it's got it all so far, this tale. And this final chapter of the Teddy Atlas Career Profile will document his journey with Michael Moorer, the fight with Evander Holyfield, and their subsequent parting of ways. And then you've got all the other champions that Teddy trained, the likes of Alexander Povetkin, Alexander Gerdvik, and Tim Bradley. We've got some great stories to share in this episode in what is the final part of Teddy Atlas. So we're going to jump right in. And where we left off in part 3 was where Michael Moorer was on the phone talking to Teddy Atlas about what had happened with Shannon Briggs and what had happened at that motel. And basically, Michael Moorer wanted Teddy Atlas back. He chose to walk away from Teddy Atlas. They chose to part ways with one another. But Michael Moorer wanted him back. Now, when Teddy returned to Staten Island, Michael called him again, and the same conversation was had. Teddy would relent on his position, offering Moorer his tutelage once more. The lure of a big payday and the opportunity to change Moorer's life for the better were big factors in his turn, and the heavyweight crown was calling. John Davimos met Teddy and Michael at the airport in Los Angeles and drove the three of them to Palm Springs. Teddy's mind was plagued with the difficulty of his and Michael's previous pairing, though he felt he had to make it work. The heavyweight championship would prove to Teddy that his sojourn down a different path to the one his father had traversed was not a wasted endeavour. The uneasy team arrived on the grounds of the Riviera Hotel, greeted by positive energy. At the reception's front desk, the manager welcomed them with a big smile, telling them how proud the members of the hotel were to have the future heavyweight champion staying with them. He went over the room numbers and general housekeeping arrangements, handing out the respective keys. The hotel was set up like a compound, a series of standalone buildings surrounding a swimming pool and tennis courts. "I've put Mr. Atlas in the room next to Mr. Moorer," the manager announced, thinking logically that Teddy would want to be near his fire. Davimos, understanding the turbulent relationship of Teddy's relationship with Michael, immediately cut in, saying, "No, Mr. Atlas wants to be in the building farthest away from Mr. Moorer's." Despite the oddity of the pairing, Teddy was faithful to his task, meticulously planning every detail of the camp. Michael was running a couple of miles a day, and Teddy had him on a strict schedule, beginning with a 5 a.m. daily run and ending with a nightly curfew of 10 o'clock. In between, his real day would begin at 1 o'clock, when he would start training sessions. The hotel put up a tent on 2 of the tennis courts with a ring and seats for spectators, as well as heavy bags, double M bags, speed bags, and other boxing equipment. Michael had good, tough sparring partners in Adolfo Washington and Bigfoot Martin amongst them, and Teddy videotaped the sessions so that later on we could look at them and analyse what was needed to recognise certain tendencies and refine technique. They also had videos of Holyfield's fights, although Michael didn't want to watch them, preferring to focus on himself, much to Teddy's dismay, though he eventually turned to Atlas's way of thinking. Michael's entourage came to camp. Flem, another ex-cop named Wick, and a group of other guys from Detroit who protected him and kept him motivated. Whenever he came to a training session without them, Teddy knew it was going to be a productive day. When he would arrive with them, Teddy knew it was going to be a rough day. One day, Michael showed up with his group wearing an unfamiliar pair of dark glasses that he had never worn before, a pair of wraparound Oakleys that had become very fashionable at the time. Teddy had forecast a tough day from then on. He said, "I knew right away that I was going to have a real problem with him that day. Sure enough," he said, "I ain't training today." His guys had all come into the tent with him, and they were standing around flanking him. "I didn't hear you," I said. Michael's reply, "I said I'm not training." I turned to his guys and I looked right at them. "Get out." They hesitated, looking at Michael. "Get out." They left. I got right up in Michael's face and said, "You're training today. Do you understand?" And he was staring me down through his impenetrable mirrored sunglasses. "Take those frigging sunglasses off," I said. "You want to stare at me? Take the glasses off." He wouldn't take them off. "What's the matter? You afraid to look at my eyes?" "I ain't afraid." He took off the glasses, but he couldn't hold my gaze. He stared at me for a second, then looked away. "Listen," I said. "I told you from the beginning when you called me up in Mississippi, begging me to train you for this fight, I'm only doing this for one reason. To win. I'm not here to get in the ring that night and say, we fought for the heavyweight title. Do you understand? I'm here to win. If you have any other ideas, then let's stop right now and go home. Because if you don't train today, it's not that this one day is going to make you out of shape physically. It's going to make you soft mentally. You duck what you're supposed to do today, the night of the fight you'll think it's okay not to face what you're going to face there. On the other hand, if you do what I tell you, what you're supposed to do, on that night, you'll know that you face what you had to face every day, and you'll draw strength from that." John Davimos heard about the encounter, and he asked Teddy about it over dinner that night. He said, "It's okay, I took care of it. I told him. But you better tell him to get new fucking bodyguards because these guys are useless." When I told them to leave, they left. The whole idea of bodyguards is they're supposed to stay with the guy in case somebody's going to do something to him. I told them to get out and they all left. We had a good laugh about that. But each day it seemed Michael and Teddy had to climb the same hill they'd climbed the day before. Teddy knew there was limits, that you needed to give your guy a little leeway in certain areas. Some trainers demanded total abstinence. Teddy told Michael he could have girls up there 3 weeks up until before the fight, but on the condition that he didn't bring them around during training sessions. Costi Amato had always said that it wasn't the act of sex that was hurtful to a fighter. It was the chasing around and the late-night socialising that was damaging. Teddy agreed with that. Teddy never believed all that crap about sex sapping your energy. Cuss had 2 fighters back in the 1950s and 1960s, Mike Bulich and Jimmy Arness, who were both deaf mutes. They were the reason they instituted the red lights on the ring post to signal the last 10 seconds of a round. Bulich and Arness were tough bastards who broke all the rules about going out. They'd have sex all through training camp, even up to the night before a fight, but they never got tired during a fight, and Cuss said it was because they never heard all the bullshit from people about how it was supposed to hurt them. The point is, Teddy wasn't unreasonable, and he didn't believe in a bunch of fairy tales or superstitions, but he did want his fighter to be focused. One morning, Teddy saw Michael walk out of the building with a girl. He could see them through the hedges outside the tent. It was before noon, but she was wearing evening wear, a shiny blue dress and high heels. They stopped walking for a minute. He turned around and said something to her. Then she began walking towards where Teddy was standing, while Michael stayed back. Teddy kept out of sight and watched her enter the tent. About 5 minutes later, Michael approached. Teddy stepped out of the shadows. "Tell her to leave," he said, "and let's get ready." He didn't even try to act innocent. Michael knew Teddy had him. When they entered the tent, he walked right over to her and whispered something in her ear, and she got up and left. In Teddy's eyes, they were there to work. It wasn't about showing off for a girl. It was about the business at hand and being prepared. One night, Teddy was in his room, lying in bed after a long day, and the phone on the nightstand rang. Teddy used to look at the phone each night and pray for it not to ring. He knew if it rang 9 times out of 10, it was going to make his life difficult. Sure enough, it was Michael. "I ain't running tomorrow," he said, and he hung up. So Teddy got up and put his sneakers on and hiked over to his building. He climbed the stairs to his floor and knocked on the door. He didn't answer, so he kept knocking. Finally, he heard footsteps. "What? Open the door!" He opened the door, a crack, but the chain was on. "You better let me in before I kick this fucking door open." "You threatening me?" "Open the freaking door, Michael," he said. He took off the chain, but he kept his foot there. So Teddy tried to open it, but his foot was there. So Teddy put his shoulder against the door, and he barged his way in. Michael said, "I don't care what you say, I'm not running." Teddy's response, "You're getting up in the morning, and you're fricking running." "No, I'm not. Now get out." "What are you going to do, Michael? You're going to hit me? You can't fight Holyfield, but you'll stand up to me. Go ahead. Do something." Teddy shoved him. "Don't fucking touch me." "Why? What are you going to do? You don't want to have a camp no more, then just say so. But don't stand here and threaten me and tell me that you ain't going to run, because then you're telling me that I don't know how to be a trainer. You're telling me that what I do don't mean nothing, that you don't care about what we're here for, and I'm telling you, it's not going to go down that way. I'd rather freaking get it over with now than to leave any questions. So if you want to fight me, let's go. But don't tell me that you're going to abuse me in another way by making me less than a trainer." So they stood there, inches between them, staring at each other. Michael put out his chest and said, "I'm warning you once more. You leave, or we're going to come to blows. Something's going to happen." Teddy's response, "Do what you got to do." He braced himself. He really thought this was going to get physical. Suddenly, Michael bent over, grabbed his sneakers, and he rushed past Teddy swearing, "Motherfucker." He stopped outside the door, put the sneakers on. He didn't even bother to lace them up, and he ran down the steps. John Davimos was out in the car park, and he saw Michael leave the building and break into a run. He knew what was going on, because Michael had called him during the standoff with Teddy. Teddy and John knew Michael's threat not to run was really just a cry for help in Teddy's eyes. He said it was another in an ongoing series of tests. Would I stand up to him? How could he stand up to Holyfield if the guy who was telling him that it was going to be okay didn't stand up to him? If the guy leading him was afraid of the lion, he had to make sure that I was willing to face the lions too. "What the fuck happened?" Davimos said, as Teddy came down the stairs and out the door. "I don't know. I guess he's doing his fricking road work." It was certainly tough keeping up with Michael's moods. A few days later, Michael said to him, "You never eat with me." "Eat with you? You're lucky I train with you. You don't like to be around me, do you? Why don't you come to dinner with me tonight?" "All right," Teddy responded. "Fine. You paying?" So they went out for dinner. Teddy, Davimos, Michael, and his guys. And they sat there and they ate and they talked about the next day's training session. At one point, the waitress didn't hear Michael call out to her. He decided she was purposely ignoring him. It made him so mad, he stormed out of the restaurant. Flem went after him, but Teddy just kept on eating. After a while, life with Michael was like being in a combat zone, and you just learnt to shrug off things. Bombs blowing up, bullets whistling by, no problem. Keep going about your business. Davimos looked at Teddy and said, "You still eating?" "Oh yeah, he'll be there in the morning." Flem came back a while later, said he couldn't find him. He took off. "Don't worry about it," Teddy said. "Finish your meal." When we got back to the hotel, Michael was back in his room. It was close to 10 o'clock, and he told Flem that after he left the restaurant, he started walking back to the hotel. At 9:45, he realised he was still a mile away. He didn't want to break his curfew, so he ran the rest of the way. When Teddy found out about that, he was floored. I mean, think about the change. That wacko ran back to his room so he wouldn't miss his curfew. That's pretty heavy. It showed Teddy that despite all of the posturing and acting out, Michael Moorer wanted to win the fight. He didn't want to break the discipline of the curfew because he thought there was some magic to it. The other thing it showed Teddy was that he was looking for somebody, a parent, somebody to take him and say, "It's going to be all right, son." Some days the responsibility of it was a heavy burden for Teddy. He couldn't let the guy be weak, and that meant he couldn't indulge in his own weaknesses. Every day it was a battle. Every day it was another test, another challenge to see if Teddy was going to be there and stand up for something and tell him to stand up, or if Teddy was going to flinch and run away and give in. It got to be very wearing for Teddy. The physical confrontations, the near fist fights. There were days when he wouldn't throw punches, and Teddy would physically get in the ring with him and say, "Throw fucking punches. Throw punches." Teddy had nightmares that Michael would get in the ring with Holyfield and not throw punches, and the referee would stop the fight. Desperation and inventiveness often go hand in hand. So this is what Teddy did. They had 100 or more people watching the sparring sessions, and there were seats set up for them in the tent. Teddy went around one day, right before his last round, telling them that when they heard Teddy say jab, he wanted them to say it too. Teddy knew that the jab was going to be a big part of the fight, so in the last round, the whole place was taking Teddy's lead and going, jab. The whole crowd was going, jab, jab, jab. How could he not respond? He had to jab. He had to. Michael's guys, Flem and Wick and the rest of them, well, they loved it. "You're scary," Wick said to Teddy. "You're starting to scare me." 2 weeks before the fight, an amazing thing happened. Michael became perfect. After all of the confrontations and problems, he suddenly became the most perfect student you'd ever seen in your life. They were hitting the bag during a training session one day, and this guy, who had been refusing to box, refusing to train some days, said, "Tell me to be strong." As soon as Teddy said it, he knew he couldn't stumble. "You are strong," he said. "Tell me what's going to happen on the 22nd, Michael said. "You're going to be the next heavyweight champ of the world. Tell me how I'm going to do it. You're going to do it with a jab. You're going to do it with a consistent jab. You're going to do it with a hook, and you're going to do it with determination. That's how you're going to do it." Michael was tearing up the bag. Bam, bam, bam. Faster and faster and faster. It turned out to be the best workout they'd ever had. The strange thing was, it made Teddy really nervous. He walked back to his room afterwards and took a shower. Then he went outside and got in the jacuzzi and let the jets wash over him. He'd bought in to what he was teaching Michael. Michael had bought in to what he was teaching him. He'd stopped fighting Teddy. He'd gotten with the program. In a weird way, he'd managed to flip things around. Teddy remembered something that Cuss used to say. He said, "Nature is very smart and intuitive, and it finds a way." Michael had figured out how to get out of the eye of the storm. He turned things around, and now all the pressure was on Teddy. It was if it had said, "All right, I'm going to do everything the right way now. I'm going to do everything you say. No more excuses. No more finding reasons to lose. No more setting myself up. No more refusing to face what's coming. I'm going to do everything right. Now it's on you, Teddy. It's on you." He was right. If he hadn't turned the tables, I'd have been able to say, the son of a bitch didn't listen. He didn't want to win. It would have given Teddy a way out. But if he wanted to win, if he gave his all and he didn't win, then what would that mean? That Teddy had lied to him? It wasn't something that Teddy wanted to think about too much. A few days later, the team flew into Vegas. The fight was a week away. Caesar's Palace had a limo waiting for them at the airport. When they arrived in Vegas, Moore trained at the famed Johnny Tocco's gym, where a ghost was in residence. And Teddy explains, "When Michael got in the ring, I noticed a poster up on the wall behind him of Mike Tyson. It was strange because it was a poster I'd never seen before. It had Tyson's record listed on it, which at the time of the poster was 35-0. Michael's record was 34-0. If he won the championship, it would be the same as Tyson's at the time of that poster. It was an eerie moment for me. I was looking up at Michael in the ring, and there was Tyson's ghost floating over his head. This thing that was supposed to have happened for me, but didn't. I guess the suspense of not knowing what was going to happen, the anxiety, had started to get to him by then. All these omens I'd seen, and it still wasn't enough. Teddy said to himself, "Gee, I wish there was an even more direct sign that would tell me everything's going to be okay." That's how much pressure he was under. He just had to win the fight. As he walked through the casino, he decided to ask the spirits in a very Vegas way. He stopped at a roulette table. He didn't even know the rules, but he stopped at the table, handed the croupier a $100 bill, and received 4 green $25 chips. He said, "How does it work?" "Whatever you want to do. You can play red, you can play black, or different columns." "No, I don't want to do any of that," Teddy said. "I just want to put it on a number." "What number?" 35. So I handed him the chips, Teddy said, and he placed them on the number 35. There were other players at the table. They were playing much smaller, like $1 at a time. But he didn't even know how to look at the ball going around the wheel. He wasn't even looking or aware when the spin was over. Suddenly, they pushed Teddy $3,500 in chips. The ball had landed on 35. He turned to the lady next to him and he said, "I won." "You sure did," she replied. "We're going to win," Teddy shouted. "You already won, honey." No, you don't understand." Holy shit. Teddy didn't know what to do. A part of him wanted to cry. A part of him wanted to explain it all, to tell them that this means we're going to win the World Heavyweight Championship. But he didn't tell them. He just picked up the money and left the table. And he went to the cage and he cashed out. In Teddy's mind, he thought that this meant something. Obviously, you really would. But it was like everything was going their way. So Teddy took that money plus $1,500 more and he put it on Michael, who was a 2-1 underdog to win the fight. Las Vegas, in the days leading up to a big fight, develops this supercharged atmosphere and you can feel the buzz in the air. But even with that charge, or maybe because of it, Teddy was very concerned that Michael not lose his edge. He brought Bigfoot Martin along with him, which was an unusual thing. Usually when you break camp for a prize fight, you send the sparring partners home. But Teddy made Bigfoot come with them because he wanted Michael to spar one more day. Nothing too hard. He didn't want him to be overtrained. Just 3 easy rounds, 5 days before the fight to keep him sharp and focused. There was a million distractions to contend with. All the media people, the interviews, the TV spots, the fans wanting to say hello or get an autograph. Teddy tried to control as many things as he could. He had Michael staying in a room under an assumed name because he didn't want any strangers or enemies calling him up in the middle of the night and waking him. "This is what you worry about," he said. "You worry about stuff like this." The other thing that he did was he had his guys, Flem and Wick, set up security stations down the hall from Michael's suite. They were there 24 hours a day. They did 8-hour shifts. Anybody who wanted to get into Michael's room had to get past them. They also had all the food orders that went to Michael's room sent up to another room on the floor under a different name, again, to make sure no funny stuff was going on. All those years with Cuss, some of his paranoia had rubbed off on Teddy. But like they say, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they know how to get you. Somebody could do something as simple as putting a laxative in the fighter's meal. So he got the shits for a couple of days and was weak. It was stuff like that that actually happened in the old days. And Teddy wasn't taking any chances at this point. Flem, Wick and Michael approved. And they loved all this cloak and dagger stuff. The greatest worry of Teddy's was not outside distractions, but what was going on inside Michael's head. The day after they got there, Teddy went into his room and all the drapes were drawn and he couldn't see him. Literally couldn't see him. "Where the hell are you?" he said. Waiting for his eyes to adjust, he heard this small voice. "Here." Teddy didn't want to hear any small voices. Not when his guy was about to become the heavyweight champion of the world. No small voices. Where are you?" "Over here." Again the small voice. "What the fuck are you doing?" he shouted. He went around the room yanking open all the drapes. Whoa, shut that, Teddy, don't do that." "Do what? Who do you think you are, Dracula?" "Come on, Ted, stop." Teddy opened up every drape he could find. He was like Mr. Sunshine. It was the middle of the day, and he was in a black room all by himself. "You haven't hidden one day," Teddy said. "Even when you tried, I didn't let you. You did everything. Tell me how many days of sparring you missed." Michael's reply was, "None." "How many curfews?" "Never missed a curfew." "That's right," Teddy said. "So let's not hide now. There's no drawn shades here. We got nothing but great stuff to look at." The sun streamed in and Michael squinted, but he stopped protesting. The main thing leading up to the fight was to keep Michael busy, to keep him positive, not to let him brood too much. Teddy had him skip rope every day, shadow box, break a sweat, and he didn't want him working too hard. The main push was already done. He just wanted him to stay loose and fresh. A few nights after they'd arrived, Mike Borman, the PR man, a big fat-cheeked Brooklyn guy who had become a good friend of Teddy's and John Davamos's, went out to the restaurant to grab a bite while Flem and Wick and the rest of them took Michael out in the mall. In the middle of the dinner, Flem suddenly came rushing in, out of breath. "What is it, Flem?" Teddy said. He put down his burger. He shook his head. "I'm embarrassed." "What is it?" "We've lost him." "Lost who?" He was so past it all at this point, Teddy. He couldn't really take it seriously. Would it be your fighter? Borman ventured. Well, at that point, Davimos chimed in, saying to Flem, "You're a security guy. How do you lose a £220 fighter?" "Well, you see," Flem began, winding himself up to tell the story the way that a kid would do if he were explaining how he lost his homework. "We had just come back from the mall, and we were walking into the casino, and Michael was in a good mood. But as we were walking past the bingo hall, the doors suddenly opened, and all the bingo ladies came rushing out, and there was all this commotion. A couple of them bumped into him, these 70, 80-year-old women. One of them yelled at him, 'Get out of my way, you big lug. You knocked over my bingo card.' And Michael, he got so mad and so upset, so he took off. He ran away. I tried to catch up to him, but he was moving too fast. Last I saw of him, he was running down the strip." Flem hung his head in shame. Teddy said, "Mike, you finished with that ketchup?" "Yeah, Ted. You want one of my onion rings?" "Sure." Borman held out a plate of onion rings, and Teddy took one. He looked at Flem, and he said, "I wouldn't worry too much, Flem, but I might keep that story quiet. Excuse me, Mr. Borman, you know about the next heavyweight champ of the world losing a battle to a bunch of bingo ladies?" Flem looked confused. "But as far as finding him, I guarantee you wherever he went, he'll be back by his curfew." "Ask Teddy." "I'd bet on it," Teddy said. And of course, that's exactly what happened. No matter what, Michael made his curfew. The interesting thing was that aside from that dinner and a few other occasions, once they'd gone to Vegas, Michael wouldn't let Teddy out of his sight. He wanted Teddy around all the time. Borman was the first to pick up on it. They'd finish an interview, and they'd be on the way out of the interview area, and if Teddy was lagging behind, Michael and his crew, well, they'd suddenly stop and go, "Where's Teddy? Where's Teddy?" Borman thought he was hysterical. "He's your best friend now, huh? You understand what's going on, don't you, Mike?" "Yeah. He's scared to death, and you're his security blanket. Did anyone tell him that you ain't going to be throwing the punches on Saturday night? He is." So the day of the weigh-in arrived, and Michael was waiting for Teddy in his room, waiting to stretch and warm up. Teddy was like picking him up, initiating a freak-out that wasn't ideal preparation for a world title fight. John Davimos came running up to Teddy's room. "Where the hell are you? He's freaking out asking for you. What are you leaving him alone for?" When Teddy walked into Mora's room, he was surrounded by his hangers-on. Attempting a psychological masterstroke, Teddy took control of Mora's insecurity. "Okay, we're not going to shake out today," he said. "Why not?" Michael's response. "Because you're ready." He looked at Teddy as if he wasn't sure what he meant. Teddy said, "You're more ready than anybody I've ever trained. In fact, I want you to know that I'm going to do something I've never done before." "What's that?" Michael said. "I've got to do a live interview with an ABC affiliate from your hometown, Monessen. I'm telling them that you're going to be the next heavyweight champ of the world. I'm guaranteeing it. You know I never say things I don't mean. I'm going to go on there and guarantee this. And I'm right, ain't I?" Again, Michael Mora just looked at him. "I'm right, ain't I?" Michael's response, "You're right." Teddy grabbed his cheeks, looked Mora right in the eyes and said, "I know I am." Later, Teddy went on the air and parroted the guarantee. He knew Michael's friends from back home would contact him, and that in turn would boost his confidence. Sure enough, the call started coming in. "Michael, you know what your trainer just did? He guaranteed that you will win the title tomorrow night. If you don't win the title," he said, "it means he's not a real trainer." Can you believe he said that shit? Borman asked Teddy about it. "When did you think of that?" he inquired, when I walked in and saw that look on his face. Later that afternoon, with the fight less than 30 hours away, Teddy made an executive decision to relax his fighter. He said to Borman, "Let's take him to a movie." We got a newspaper to see what was playing. There were movies that had gotten good reviews, love stories and dramatic films that were up for awards. But I said to Borman, "Let's find the movie that has the biggest body count." I don't remember the name of the movie now, but it was something with Ice-T in it. Slim Jim Jack fucks up the hood. Something like that. All I know is that a lot of people in it got whacked. Borman was sitting next to me, squirming and muttering the whole time. "When is this going to be over? while Michael was behind us with the whole crew yelling at the screen, "Yeah, fuck this guy up. Cap that motherfucker." At one point, Bowman tried to get up and go out to the lobby, but I grabbed him and I said, "No, you're here to the end, just like me. You're not leaving." After the movie, Michael and his crew went back to his room. Around 10 o'clock, Teddy went over there to make everyone leave, and after they left, he sat in a chair while Michael got ready for bed and brushed his teeth. "What are you doing?" he asked me from the bathroom. "I was just going to tell you a bedtime story." "What?" "A bedtime story? About a kid who came to camp, not sure of why he came to camp, and by the time it was over, he knew why. He made up his mind why. He was going to be the next heavyweight champ of the world. He went to sleep a regular contender, and he woke up the champion of the world." Michael came out of the bathroom, and he had the toothbrush in his hand, and his mouth was full of foam. He just looked at Teddy, and he smiled a little. They'd been through so much together by this point. He just smiled at Teddy, and he said, "All right, Teddy." So they said goodnight, and after Teddy left his room, he went down to the lobby of the hotel to give a ticket to his brother Terrell, who had just flown out from New York. It was mobbed downstairs. The fight crowd was out in full force. And as he tried to find his brother, there was loads of people going up to him and wishing him luck and shaking his hand. Teddy was just exhausted, just wanted to get back to his room at this point. He finally found Terrell and he gave him his ticket, but people were still going up to him. All of a sudden, one guy shook his hand, and it was different. He didn't say, "Good luck." He said, "Congratulations." Teddy wasn't really looking at him at first, but then he did take a look, and he recoiled in shock. It was Donnie Lalonde. Teddy let go of his hand like it was contaminated. "You piece of shit," Teddy said. "I felt dirty because I'd shaken his hand. I didn't know it was you." Lalonde was thrown by his reaction, but he kept plowing ahead. "I just wanted to say congratulations." "Congratulations? Go fuck yourself." "But you're there." "It don't matter no more, Teddy. You don't need to be mad no more." Teddy stared at him. He'd completely forgotten about his brother at this point, and he said to Donnie Lalonde, "You fucking piece of shit. What you did hasn't changed because of this." Teddy took a step towards him, and Lalonde saw the look on his face and backed away. Lalonde said, "How can you still be angry? You're there. You made it." "I'm there," Teddy said. Now, it wasn't even about him having the nerve to show his face and think about how he could be forgiven by Teddy. It was about him not actually understanding. "I ain't there. We didn't win yet," Teddy said. "But you've made it," Lalonde said. "Everybody knows." "I ain't made it. We ain't won anything yet." Now you could actually hear his wife or his girlfriend, whoever she was at the time, say to him, "Donnie, let's get out of here. You've tried. Let it go." She took his hand, pulling him away. He kept looking back, saying, "It don't matter. You're there." By then, all these people had come between us, not even aware of what was going on, just well-wishers wanting to shake Teddy's hand. "Hey, Teddy, good luck." He was pushing past them all, going after him, saying, "You fuck. I didn't win anything yet." "It does matter. I haven't won anything." Eventually, his brother Terrell caught up to him and grabbed him by the shoulder. But Teddy, still infuriated, kept yelling after Lalonde, "It does matter, you piece of shit. It matters." Saturday night had finally arrived. In the dressing room, before the fight, Teddy had a list of things he wanted, in order that Michael was comfortable. One of the items was a boombox. Teddy wanted Michael to have his gangster rap music to listen to in the dressing room. When they arrived there, well, there was no boombox. Teddy sent Flem back to the hotel to procure it. "Get that frickin' boombox," Teddy said. It was funny because during camp, Michael and Teddy had gotten into arguments about his music. All that motherfucking bitch slut hoe stuff, which Teddy hated. It amazed him that record companies produced music like that, and that people had bought it. Teddy tolerated it if there was no women or kids around. One time Michael put on one of those tapes when there was a group of kids watching them, and Teddy said, "Shut it off. This is a professional place, and I won't allow it." Michael's response, "Make me." So Teddy took the tape out of the boombox, and he stomped on it with his foot. Michael, of course, got angry, and then he went into a sulk. Teddy said, "Come on, Michael, let's just do what we're here to do." But he just kept sulking. Eventually, Mora put on a Whitney Houston tape instead and did his exercise, but he still wouldn't talk to Teddy. Finally, after doing a series of sit-ups and push-ups, he said, "So what kind of fucking music do you like?" "Similar to this," Teddy said, nodding at the boombox. "Yeah? Who? What's the name of the band?" Teddy said, "Frank Sinatra." "Man, that's old school shit, Teddy." "Well, it's what I like." The conversation carried on. Mora said, "So, what's a good record of his?" "Summer Wind is my favourite, but they're all good." So that night, Teddy went to dinner with Davamos at Sonny Bono's restaurant. In the middle of dinner, Michael came in. He put a paper bag on the table and said, "I'll see you later." And he walked out. Teddy opened the bag. It was a freaking tape of Summer Wind. Teddy found out later from Fleming that Michael had driven all over Palm Springs until he found it. The next day, when they started out the usual exercise routine, I popped in the tape. A lot of the people who had been there the day before and witnessed our argument, well, they'd come back. When they heard Frank's voice, they smiled. It was like, this is funny. This is worth our $1. Now, on the night of the fight, Teddy was returning the favour. He wanted Michael to have his gangster rap music. Flem came back with the boombox, and he got the tape out. Michael said, "Nah, that's all right." No, Teddy said, and he put it on, because he didn't want him to be absorbed by silence. He felt like the music would keep him from slipping into the darkness of his thoughts and fears. So the music was playing, and there was a TV on, a monitor in the dressing room showing the preliminary bouts. A couple of guys said, "Hey, do you want to keep that monitor on?" It was showing the Junior Jones and John Michael Johnson fight. Jones was a big favourite. Undefeated, world champ, 7-1 or something like that, on the Vegas tote boards. Teddy was thinking maybe we shouldn't have it on. He's the favourite, just like Holyfield's the favourite, and if he wins, he might not be good. But in a couple of minutes of watching, Teddy picked up on what was going on. He took a gamble. "Leave it on," he said. "Junior Jones is going to lose this fight. You want to know why? Because this is a night of upsets." Meanwhile, a procession of people were coming by the dressing room to say hello to Michael and to Teddy, but nobody was allowed in. But they were coming by anyway. Teddy kept popping out of the dressing room to shake the hands and say hello. Then he'd go back. On the monitor, just as he'd predicted, Junior Jones was losing his fight. And Teddy said, "See, it's in the air. It's a night of upsets." 6:45, just 1 hour before the fight now. Michael had already limbered up a little bit. He'd done some jumping jacks and stretches, and then the officials from the Nevada Boxing Commission and a guy from Holyfield's camp stopped by to watch Teddy wrap Michael's hands. One of their guys was over in Holyfield's dressing room watching his trainer wrap Holyfield. That was the protocol. The commissioners also brought the gloves over, the ones that they had marked at the weigh-in the previous day. Holyfield, the champion, had gotten first choice of the gloves, as was the custom, after which they had gotten their turn. The brand of glove, Reyes, was negotiated at an earlier meeting. Teddy thought the Reyes glove gave them an edge because it was a puncher's glove, a little bit tighter and more streamlined than most other brands. Once he'd found a pair that fit Michael properly, Teddy signed the inside lip of the glove. These were all normal precautions to ensure that the gloves weren't switched. Now, it might sound excessive, but in a big money event with gambling involved, you couldn't be too careful. So Teddy inspected the 5 gloves, plus the backup pair, to make sure that his mark was in them, and then he set about wrapping Michael's hands. The music was playing. Fleming Wick and some of the other guys were standing around, along with the commissioners and a TV cameraman. Michael sat in a chair in the middle of the room, near the table, with the medical supplies and tape. So Teddy put another chair in front of him, with a rolled-up towel, on top of the back for him to lay his forearm across. He extended his right hand. Now, they always wrapped his right hand first because that was his jab hand, the hand that started everything. So Teddy took his hand and started winding one of the wraps around it, and he said, "This hand's going to sing all night." It's very intimate, wrapping a fighter's hands. You can feel if there's tension in the hands and see it in the fighter's eyes and the demeanour, whether or not the fighter's drifting or if he's focused. Michael looked good to Teddy. After he'd finished wrapping and taping his hands, They had 35 minutes left before showtime. Michael put on his cup and trunks. Teddy helped him tie up and get ready. And after that, Michael did some more stretching and then some shadow boxing, enough to work up a little bit of a sweat. And with 10 minutes to go before the fight, Teddy puts the gloves on him, tapes up the gloves so the laces were secure, and puts on the robe. Teddy always did a checklist to make sure that we hadn't forgotten anything. Did he have his coat? Was he wearing his trunks? It's not a joke. He'd seen fights where the fighter took off his robe and he was just in his jock. He'd forgotten to put on his trunks. So Teddy did a checklist with his cutman, made sure that they had their end swells and the Vaseline in a bucket of ice, various coagulants, Q-tips, scissors, adhesive tape, gauze, towels, mouthpiece and backup mouthpiece, check. Somebody then pops the head in. It's time. As Teddy and Maura came out of the tunnel that led into the boxing arena, Teddy decided that they should run to the ring. He said, there was a camera guy backing up in front of us, and as the light hit us and the music blasted, I shouted at the camera guy, you better be moving. He almost fell over, trying to back up and stay with the team as they ran towards the ring. They got on the ring and Maura was hyped up. They had rehearsed the moment in training. The agonising wait then began for the arrival of the world champion, Evander Holyfield. Michael, Teddy said, I want you to think about one thing now. This is the last time you'll be coming into the ring first. From now on, you'll be coming in second. As the introductions were underway, Teddy sensed that Michael was nervous. Atlas needed Maura to feel confident that he had his back. Teddy felt it was important that Maura felt secure going in to the biggest fight of his life, and he explained the fight night. He said, I had these two old-timers in the corner with me, Mo Smith and Ralph Citro, who was a cutman with the Cronk Gym for years. I wanted guys who had been around and to whom it meant something to be there, guys that could be counted on. In Mo's case, he had been around boxing for 60 years and he'd never been in a heavyweight title fight. I felt that he should be. Mills Lane was the referee, which I was happy about. I felt comfortable with him. Like Michael Buffer, the ring announcer, who was famous for his trademark "Let's get ready to rumble," Mills had his own signature phrase, which he would bark loudly after issuing the ring instructions. Let's get it on! In the moments before the bell rang to start the fight, Teddy reminded Maura once again that he was going to win this fight with his jab. The whole plan was predicted on that, because Teddy had noticed watching the tape of Holyfield that he bounced, and when he bounced, he wasn't set to punch. He had to stop. There was a split second where he was vulnerable. That was when Teddy wanted Michael to catch him with jabs. The first round went okay. Basically, when you're in the first round of a big fight like this, and there's been all this build-up and hype, you just want to make it through the round, get past the nervousness, and realise that it's just a fight. You also don't want to get blitzed. You know what it's like when you've just got a guy that comes at you with everything he's got before you're really into the fight or ready to deal with it. How many times have we seen it? Well, Maura got through that first round okay. But the problem that Teddy saw right from the off was that instead of throwing the jab steadily, which was the plan, Michael was looking for one punch. Teddy knew that if he didn't see the jab, then he didn't have him. He didn't have his attention. On the other hand, he was also seeing that he was right about Holyfield, that they'd gotten him at a good time, that he was vulnerable, and that this was the right night. In the second round, Michael went out, and this time he did what they'd worked on. He threw the jab. He also hooked off the jab, which was another thing that they'd worked on in camp. They felt that it could be very effective for him, especially because he was a southpaw. But near the end of the round, which he was dominating, he got careless. He threw a big right uppercut, and he posed after he threw it. He stood up too much and didn't move after he punched, and Holyfield caught him with a short right, followed by a left hook that put him down. Teddy's family was there in the arena watching. When Michael hit the canvas, Nicole burst into tears. Elaine had her eyes closed. She couldn't watch. But little Teddy said, "It's okay. He's up. He got up at the count of 2. He's not hurt." One of the questions about Maura was his chin. He'd gotten knocked down in previous fights, but he'd always gotten back up and won. When Teddy saw him go down after the little jolt of anxiety of whether he'd get up or not, he thought, he needs to remind him that every time he's been on the floor, he's always gone on to win. And the other thought Teddy had was that he needed to tell him why he'd gotten knocked down, what his mistake had been, so he could feel good about going back out there. The worst thing for a fighter is to go back out there not knowing why he's got hit. It's like sending a guy into a dark room. He doesn't know what's there. In retrospect, the knockdown was the turning point in the fight because one of the judges scored it an even round on account of how dominant Michael had been up to that point. They didn't know it at the time, but that was the heavyweight title right there. That could have been a 10A round. A lot of judges would have just counted the knockdown and ignored the rest of the round. But that isn't what happened. 2 judges scored it 10-9 for Holyfield, and the third scored it 10-10. Technically, that's the correct way of scoring a round like that. But you just don't expect it. In the third round, Michael went out very cautiously. He fought only when he was being forced to fight. Teddy was yelling at him, trying to wake him up. If you're a gardener, you don't wait until the weeds are killing your bushes. You start pulling them before they take the root and start choking your garden to death. Teddy said, "I want you to use that jab and I want you to work off it." Teddy yelled at Mora when he returned to the corner. "But I don't want you to be satisfied with it. You go in there and start backing this guy up and doing what we trained to do. Otherwise, don't come back to this fucking corner. You hear me?" As the fight progressed, the pattern continued. Michael cruising instead of speeding forward. Teddy would get him to step it up for a while, but he was frustrated by his inability to get him to keep a prompt tempo. And he explained, he said, "I had told Michael in training camp about that body and that it can be intimidating if you allow it to be because it's so chiselled. But it's a negative for him." "What do you mean?" he asked. "He's so streamlined and tight that there's actually not much protection in his body." Holyfield had gotten hurt by body punches when he fought Michael Dokes. The perception was that wasn't the place to go, but the reality was that it was the place to go. I told Michael that, and whenever he landed a body punch in the fight, you could see Holyfield grimace. The problem was that he wasn't doing it enough. Every time I saw Michael stop working, I said to myself, how can I get him to do more? Holyfield looked lethargic to me. He wasn't the consistent offensive machine he usually was, but incredibly, at the end of the 5th round, Michael tapped him on the ass with his glove because before they headed back to their corners. It made me crazy. "What the fuck are you doing tapping this guy on the ass?" I yelled at him. "He ain't going to let up on you because you do that. Don't start looking for deals or begin lying to yourself." As the fight went on, Michael kept letting Holyfield hold on the inside, kept letting him rest, kept letting him use his experience to conserve energy for the later rounds. Even though I thought we were winning most of the rounds, I was upset. We were trying to take a special fighter's title. Sure enough, in the 7th round, Holyfield, he stepped it up. Even though Michael was still doing some good things, I got caught up in what he wasn't doing. Holyfield was too seasoned and too smart a boxer. If we left him in a position to be able to steal the fight, he would, especially because he was the champion, and we were in Las Vegas. The 8th round produced more of the same from Michael. I could see all the opportunities he was missing. I was scared, frankly. I thought we were blowing it. When the bell rang, ending the 8th round, I put Michael's stool in the corner and climbed in the ring. As Michael walked toward me, I grabbed him and I looked him in the eyes. I said, "If you don't want to fight this guy, I will." I needed to get through to him somehow, so I sat down on his stool. It was impulsive. It wasn't premeditated or planned. Michael didn't know what to do. He just stood there looking at me. "Do you want me to fight him?" I said. "Do you? Do you want me to change places with you?" I had his attention now. "Look, Michael, I'm not getting up until you tell me you want to win the title." "Do you want to win the title?" "Yes." "Then you've got to show it." So I got up from the stool and I let him sit down. "Listen," I said, "this guy's finished." Teddy squeezed a wet sponge on Michael's head to refresh him. "He's finished." I was right up in his face, Teddy said. "Michael, there comes a time in a man's life when he decides to just live, to survive, or he wants to win. You're doing just enough to keep him off you and hope he leaves you alone. You're lying to yourself, but you're going to cry tomorrow. You're lying to yourself, and I'd be lying if I let you get away with it. Do you want to cry tomorrow? Then don't lie to yourself anymore. There's something wrong with this guy. Now, back him up and fight a full round." Over in Holyfield's corner, he was being told things like, trust in Jesus and relax and breathe deep. If you could have cut around the arena, the contrasting scenes that were going on at that moment were really something. Down in their seats, Elaine and Nicole and little Teddy were sitting in front of this big gambler, Roger King of King World. That was a syndication company behind shows like Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy and the Oprah Winfrey Show. And he had 200,000 riding on Michael. Elaine told me later that when King realised he was sitting behind her and my kids, he said, "That's why I bet on this fight. Your husband. I didn't bet on Maura. I bet on him." He wound up talking to them throughout the fight, and when I sat down on Michael's stool, he said, "Now that's different. I've never seen that before." Meanwhile, Elaine was going, "Oh my God, he's lost his mind." And my 9-year-old son, Teddy, was going, "It's okay. Dad knows what he's doing. He's trying to get Michael to fight." And on the HBO telecast, Jim Lampley was saying about me and Maura, "I don't know how long that marriage can last, but it's an interesting one." Despite my attempts to ruse him, Michael didn't pick up the pace in the 9th round. It was if he refused to acknowledge himself that the heavyweight title meant something. If he told himself it was important, he'd be too vulnerable if he lost. If he didn't acknowledge the importance, then he couldn't be hurt. That was why I told him that he was lying to himself. I knew he was going to hurt if he lost. I knew it. I felt that I couldn't let up. At the same time, there was a temptation to let up. There was this very little voice in my head saying, "They're not going to look at you. They're going to look at him. They're going to say, 'You did all you could. You can't fight for the guy. He's a mutt. It's not your fault.'" The impulse to hide behind that scared the shit out of me. If I did that, I was a co-conspirator. I was the real mutt. So I kept pounding it into him. "I'm telling you, you're blowing it, Michael. You're blowing it. And you know what? You're going to cry afterwards. You're going to cry. He's going to lose his next fight instead of this fight." Some people might think I was too hard on him. But I knew it was all there for us. Holyfield was less than 100%. By not going full out, Michael was allowing him to survive. Holyfield was grabbing him and clutching, and Michael was going along with it. He was making that silent contract with Holyfield. He was embracing it. If Michael had kept pressuring him, he would have knocked Holyfield out. As much as I respect as I have for Holyfield, that's the simple truth. In the 12th and final round, Michael continued to nail Holyfield with his jab and with the jab uppercut that they'd worked on in training, but always just one punch at a time, landing and then backing off, the way he'd done throughout the fight. When the bell sounded, Teddy's first thought was, did we do enough? Everyone else in the corner was kissing and hugging him and saying, "Hey, champ," and congratulating him. The first thing Teddy said to him was, "You could have done more." In those agonising moments, while they were all waiting for the decision, Teddy kept thinking, "You could have done more." What's funny is that down at ringside, Teddy's son, little Teddy, was like a little echo of him. He was telling Elaine, "I don't know if he did enough." A 9-year-old boy, analysing it as calmly as could be. The longest moment in boxing is the one right after you hear the words, "the winner," and if you're waiting for the ring announcer to say either "new" or "still champion." That's an excruciating moment at ringside where Teddy's family was sitting. Roger King and this other gambler who had bet on Holyfield were arguing over who they thought had won. Teddy's daughter was so nervous he was shaking, but his son was very serene. He was listening to these two gamblers argue. King was going, "and new," and the other guy was going, "and still." And that's all Teddy's son could hear, "and new," and "still," back and forth. So when Michael Buffer said, "the winner," and "new," Teddy turned back to the Holyfield better and said, "and new." And that was it. Everybody started going crazy, hugging each other, jumping up and down. That's all Teddy was waiting for, that word. But if you watch the tape of the fight, you'll see that while Michael was hugging Davimos and the Duvers and their partner Bill Kozerski, Teddy was off by himself to one side, lost in his thoughts. Meanwhile, Jim Lampley on TV was saying, "What is Teddy Atlas thinking right now? Look at him. He's the only one not sharing in the celebration." Amid the pandemonium, the crush of the TV crew, the cornermen, the security people and the fans, Teddy was thinking about his father. During the 12th round, he'd looked up, and he'd never done this before. He'd looked up and crossed himself. He said, "Listen, Dad, please help us. This is what I wanted to give you. All those years I lived in Catskill. This is why. During the bedlam, Teddy thanked his father, and he said, "Thanks, Dad." And it was as if he had finally buried him, as if he hadn't really buried him until that moment. He said, "It turned out okay, didn't it?" Then Teddy thought, he's got to get his kids in the ring. You see, Teddy's dad had looked out for him and given him this gift, and now he needed to look out for them. He knew they wanted to come into the ring. When they were really little, they'd asked him, "Dad, when you win the heavyweight championship of the world, can we come in the ring?" And he'd said to them, "Yeah, of course." So that was what he was thinking at this moment, and he'd never forgotten them asking. Henry Gluck, the CEO of Caesars, made his way over to Teddy and said, "Congratulations, Teddy." Teddy's response was, "Yeah, thank you. Listen, can I get my kids into the ring? I've got to get them in here." It wasn't easy with all the people and the security that were jammed in there. Gluck turned to one of the security guards and said, "Get Teddy Atlas's kids in the ring right now." The security guys located his kids and started passing them up, handing them up into the ring. Nicole was crying. Little Teddy's eyes were red. "You did it, Dad." "No, we did it," was Teddy's response, taking them both into his arms, hugging them tight. In beating Holyfield, Michael had proved to himself that he could be confident. He was capable of being the best. The fire of the demons inside him had been dampened somewhat. Teddy sat down in June of 1994 with John Davimos and Bill Kozerski to discuss Michael's future and his first defence. Money was a driving factor too. Who could moor a fight that would make him the biggest payday? That was the primary concern. Then came the athletic risk. If the team picked the wrong fight, the title and the money were gone. So with that in mind, a host of names was explored. Tyson, of course, was in jail. Lennox Lewis, well, he was too dangerous. Oliver McCall wasn't enough of a fiscal draw. Suddenly, Teddy's brain jolted, and he said, "George Foreman." It was as if a flashbulb had popped. Everybody stared at Teddy, and you could see it in the faces. George Foreman, of course. That was the fight. It gave you everything. There was the draw of his name, his ongoing comeback story, his big personality and ability as a salesman, and the best part, George was an old man. He was 44 years old, a guy Michael matched up against well. It was a fight, at least on the surface, that they should have had no problem winning. From that moment on, all the efforts went into making the bout happen. Supposedly, and sometimes it's hard to know what's true and what just fits into the law, Foreman had been telling his people, even before they'd approached him, that he wanted to fight Michael. He had seen something in Michael while broadcasting the Holyfield fight for HBO that made him feel he could win. A guy once said that there are no second acts in American life. Teddy said, "A guy once said that there are no second acts in American life. I'll tell you one thing, he wasn't thinking of Big George Foreman. In his first life, Foreman had been aloof, antisocial strongman, a bully who had pounded his boxing foes into submission and looked for all the world to be invincible. But in 1974, in a fight famously promoted as the Rumble in the Jungle, in Kinshasa, Zaire, Foreman was knocked out by Muhammad Ali in what still stands as one of the biggest, most stunning upsets in boxing history. 3 years later, having never really recovered from the loss, Foreman experienced a religious awakening and became an ordained Christian minister. He also became a family man, fathering 5 daughters and 5 sons, all of the boys being named George like him. In 1987, 10 years after his retirement from the sport, he reinvented himself yet again and launched a boxing comeback. It took him a few years building up his record against carefully selected opponents, but he fought his way back into contention, finally landing a championship bout against Evander Holyfield in 1991. Though Holyfield beat him convincingly, Foreman proved he was no fraud or novelty act. Even so, most people encouraged him to retire again. But Foreman was stubborn. He wanted redemption and kept looking for another chance to win back the title. After he did the TV colour work on the Mora Holyfield fight, from what Teddy had heard, he basically called up the HBO people and said, "Get me this fight." Well, they tried to talk him out of it. "Come on, George, you did it already. You came back, you had your shot. You fell short. It was a great thing, and because of it, you've got all these commercials and endorsements. You've got this TV gig with us. Why keep going? You're not getting any younger, and you don't need to prove anything. You could get hurt." George's response, "No, I can do it. I can actually finish it now." What he had seen in Michael, he believed, was somebody he could beat mentally. Teddy assessed George. He said, "You see, George was a guy who found out the hard way that it was tougher to quit than it was to fight. He had quit in Zaire. There's no doubt about it. He pirouetted around the ring and gave up. He got broken down by a man that he couldn't deal with, Muhammad Ali, and he had been forced to live with the indignity of that, the lonely truth of that for all these years. He had been forced to confront the kind of truth that visits you at 3 o'clock in the morning and comes out of the mouths of people who are not on your payroll and never seems to go away. He'd been up against that all these years, and now he saw a way out. Independent of us, he started up the machinery to get the fight. Meanwhile, at our end, we were seeing what we needed to see, and started the wheels turning too. The negotiations for the fight went like most fight negotiations go, which is to say back and forth, and on and off. Don King is always knocked as being a devious guy, which he is, but Bob Arum, well, he's just as scheming, though in a less flamboyant way. He's a hand-painted shingle to King's neon sign. Teddy gives an example. He says, the negotiation had been going on for a while. It was on, it was off, it was dead, it was back on. At one point, Davimos and Kozersky and the Duvers were on a conference call with Arum, and Arum said, "I just want you to know, you're going to have to call up your fighter and tell him you just fucked up his career, and if you don't tell him, I will, because Don King's got George Foreman on a plane as we speak, and they're halfway to Jakarta to sign contracts, and you fucked your fighter out of a tremendous payday. Don King's got George." At which some point, someone from their side said, "That's funny, Bob, because our lawyer just spoke with Foreman 10 minutes ago, and he was in Houston. So unless he's using a Star Trek transporter, it seems unlikely that he's halfway to anywhere." Arum didn't even blink. He said, "Forget that then. Let's move past that." And he meandered right into whatever the next negotiating point was. Davimos and Kozersky and the rest couldn't contain themselves. They began howling with laughter. Arum was so utterly shameless. In the end, the deal got made anyway. They got their $7 million, and as soon as they held the first press conference and got into the next phase, Teddy had to face in a real way the worries he had about losing the title. More importantly, he had to confront his worries about losing the ground that Michael had already gained as a person and as an athlete. He said, "I realised then why I'd had that stab of fear when Foreman's name came out of my mouth. I knew what George had already been through. He could recognise weakness and fear in other men because he recognised it in himself. I always said that the old George Foreman, the 44-year-old man, would have knocked out the young George Foreman. He wasn't as good physically, not nearly so, but he was tougher mentally by far. He understood the difference between lies and truth. He understood what the boundaries were, and his hard-won self-knowledge made him a much formidable foe. He could look at an opponent with near X-ray vision and recognise the very same shortcomings he had once had himself before he had been forced to deal with them." Teddy went to the first press conference aware of all these things, wanting to make sure that they didn't lose a battle before the war had even really begun. Sure enough, Teddy was right. He saw Foreman was ready to start setting land traps already. Michael made the mistake, which Teddy didn't correct, of showing up in dark glasses. Foreman immediately said, "What's the matter with you, boy? You afraid to show your eyes?" It was nearly an echo of what Teddy had said to Michael himself when he'd shown up in Palm Springs one day wearing sunglasses. Teddy knew he needed to do something. He went after Foreman on the spot. He called him a fraud, and then he grabbed him and pushed him. He challenged him. It was on TV all over the country that night, the two of them scuffing on the stage at the press conference. People thought Teddy were crazy. He was out of his mind. Foreman, by contrast, he didn't lose his cool. He knew how to play it. He restrained himself. But Teddy knew what he was doing. He was protecting his fighter. He didn't want his fighter to lose the prelim. It was like being in Rikers. Once you give up the sneakers, it was only a matter of time before they took everything else. George grasped it all. How can you be the victim or the emperor of these things, and fortunately or unfortunately, whatever your perspective is about a tough world? Well, Teddy understood that too. When the next press conference was held in Vegas, what had happened at the first one was all over the newspapers and the TV. This £150 guy shoving this 260-pound guy who was the former heavyweight champ of the world. It made the promoters very happy. They were all smiles. We couldn't have paid for that publicity. That's what they were saying. But that wasn't where Teddy was coming from. It wasn't part of the promotion for him. It wasn't some pro wrestling stunt. For him, it was real. Michael knew what it was. He understood. Michael went to the next press conference without the sunglasses. He knew he needed to do that. And that Teddy wanted him to do it. But Foreman was the master of his universe. He used it against Michael. And he said, "I see that I made you take your glasses off, boy." Teddy explained that right after the press conference, I went back to my hotel room and threw up. Mark Kriegel, the writer for the Daily News, who was following me again, as he had before the Holyfield fight, heard me in the bathroom. And when I came out, he asked me if I was okay. "Yeah, I'm fine." "It's because of Foreman, isn't it?" he said. Kriegel was a good reporter, with good instincts. My stomach's a little upset, that's all. "You got a bad feeling about this one, don't you?" Teddy shrugged. Well, the question, it made Teddy uncomfortable, because just as there had been an aura of destiny that made him believe they would win the fight against Holyfield, this particular fight filled him with dread. Michael and Teddy had needed to win the Holyfield fight for vindication and validation. Now they were champions. George Foreman, on the other hand, well, he had been waiting 20 years to redeem himself. So when Kriegel had asked Teddy if he had a bad feeling, the truth was, he did. He just didn't want to say it. Unlike the previous training camp, this one, also in Palm Springs, was trouble-free throughout. Michael was a model of perfect behaviour and hard work, but it only added to the apprehension because Teddy knew one way that they could lose the fight was if Foreman suckered him. He told Michael that the best thing that Foreman did was to throw a slow jab at him. He didn't throw it full. If you threw it full, you'd know what your line of distance was. You'd know the range and where you were safe. But if he threw it a few inches short, the way he did, you'd get this false sense of security and be fooled into thinking that was as far as it went. Nobody else had really picked up on this. Teddy had watched a lot of tape. He knew Foreman inside out. "George is 44, Teddy said. "This is his best thing. This is the only way he can beat you, by lulling you to sleep, by making you think you're safe when you're not. He'll throw this slow jab. He'll make you slow to his pace. He'll get you feeling comfortable, and then suddenly there'll be a right hand behind it. You'll never even see it coming. It won't even look like a big punch. It'll look like nothing." Every day I went over this, trying to drill it into Michael, trying to make him understand. After a few weeks, he said, "Teddy, not again. I've got it. I've got it." "No, get in the ring," I said. "We need to go over it again." It reached the point where Michael would mimic Teddy, and he would say, "I know he does this, and then I know he does that, and then there's this right hand, and you never see it. I know, Ted, I know." George was so good at running a con and making you dance to his beat that if you weren't vigilant, you were lost. After the scrap of the first press conference, Teddy really didn't know what to expect from him in Vegas, so he went to the second press conference prepared for anything. He had somebody meet him on the way and slip in a roll of quarters. He made a fist around the roll of quarters. Cuss had always told him, although he knew it from the street, that roll of quarters added 20 pounds to your punching power. Teddy guessed that he needed it against Foreman in case they actually got into anything again. He wanted to be ready. But George, well, he had instincts that were almost better than Teddy's instincts. He didn't do anything. He was friendly, charming, and funny. He already had what he wanted, so there was no need to do anything. Teddy said, George was a master. One thing that having the title and a bit more money did was give me an opportunity to show my appreciation to a lot of people who had been loyal to me over the years, so I flew several guys out for the fight, old friends of mine and guys from the neighbourhood. I probably flew 4 or 5 guys out. All told, there was my friend, Mikey Smith, Smitty, who was a kid I hung out with on the corner, and then there was another guy, Ronnie Scripps, whose late father was a bookie, Jimmy McMahon, who had been Nick Baffy's fighter, and who had managed until he retired because I'd made a promise to Nick when he was dying of cancer, and then there was Larry Coughlin. Larry was one of the guys I flew out for the fight. He'd never been to Vegas. I mean, he'd hardly ever left his basement, so a huge 5,000-room casino and hotel like the MGM Grand might as well have been a foreign country to him. I told him that he better behave himself, that he better be good, So that was on his mind. Teddy told me I better be good. I wasn't being a hard ass. He was just light-hearted, but I sincerely didn't want him to get into trouble. The first few days there, everyone was getting lost because the place was so huge. Teddy said, I was busy, but my crew would meet in different places and I'd try to join them wherever I could. I'd see Larry and Larry would hug me and say, I've been good, Teddy. You need anything? Nah. I'd give him a few bucks anyway and he'd say, thanks, Pops. He called me Pops. It's not the bullshit, Larry. You being good? Then he would see Elaine and he'd say, tell Teddy I'm being good. Early on, Larry made a discovery. He sat down at one of the bars in the MGM that was right along one of the central thoroughfares. Now, Larry wasn't much of a gambler, but he sat down at this table that had a video poker game built into it. He took out $5 and fed it in, and he started playing on those $5, a quarter at a time. Now, $5 can last you a long time that way, and while Larry was sitting there, a cocktail waitress came over and asked him if he wanted a drink. Naturally, he said yes. A couple of minutes later, she brought him back a bud, and didn't charge him for it. 10 minutes later, he ordered another one. Again, no charge. He didn't know that in Vegas, as long as you're gambling, they don't charge you for drinks. Larry thought he'd found Shangri-La. He was looking around and he was like, I ain't telling no one about this. And he wasn't moving, not for anybody. Some of the guys found him there. They'd been looking for him all over. I asked Smitty to keep an eye on him. Come on, Larry, we're going to the steakhouse. No, I'm staying here. Come on. Nope, he's not moving. Larry didn't know what the explanation was, but he'd found a seam in the fabric of the universe here in this little corner of Las Vegas, and he wasn't budging. I ain't fucking this up, and I'm not going to let anyone else fuck it up for me either. He didn't know when the seam might close, and he wasn't taking any chances, so he just stayed there. 5 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours. He stayed in that spot, and the waitress kept bringing him drinks. Word got back to me. Larry was in this spot, and he thinks he's found the one place in the universe where liquor flows eternally, and if he moves, he ain't ever going to get the same deal. Meanwhile, everyone else was making their plans for dinner, for shows, for music, whatever, because apart from the guys I'd flown in, there were about 130 other friends and relatives of mine who'd come for the fight. They started making every plan around where Larry was, because that was the only thing you could count on in Vegas. Where are we going to meet? That corner bar where Larry is. For the entire week, everyone would meet there where Larry was sitting. And any time someone would see Larry, he'd say, It's okay, I'm good, I'm behaving. Tell Teddy I'm behaving. Fight night had finally arrived. And from the moment they got into the ring, that bad feeling that Teddy had been carrying, it got worse. For one thing, Foreman jogged into the ring the same way they had for the Holyfield fight. He'd never jogged into the ring in his life. As if that weren't bad enough, he was wearing the same boxing trunks that he had worn against Ali and Zaire in 1974. Teddy had to use all his discipline to push away negative thoughts when he saw that, because what those trunks indicated to Teddy was that here was a man who was facing down his past. He wasn't running from his ghosts, he was confronting them head on. Teddy was scared. A guy who was able to face the truth that way, well, he was a dangerous guy. That was why Teddy had thrown up on the day of the press conference. He'd recognised that about Foreman. Even so, as the fight got underway, it seemed as if Michael was too young, too fast and too skilled for Foreman to keep up. Teddy had been hoping the Holyfield fight and all that they'd gone through would complete Michael. He was a better person now, he said, a more confident man. But were those qualities going to be his ally against Foreman? Teddy knew in general they were, but would they be for this specific fight? The truth is, the careful way he'd fought against Holyfield, as frustrating as it was for Teddy, was the way he should have fought against Foreman. Teddy said, but I couldn't tell him that. My job had been to make Michael more whole, and now that he was, I couldn't steer him away from it. I couldn't tell him not to be more sectarian, to pull back and to not be a champion. I let him gallop. For most of the night, it looked like a smart move. He took the fight to Foreman in every round. He was dominant. Still, Teddy knew, as a strategic approach, he was dangerous. There came a moment in the 8th round where the corner, I think it was Mo, had said to Teddy, "Great job, Teddy. This one's in the bag." Teddy went nuts. "Shut up. Don't you say anything about this fucking fight being over. Don't fucking say that." Mo apologised. "I didn't mean anything by it." "This fight's far from over," Teddy said. "Don't you understand?" He didn't say another word. It was so obvious to the corner that Teddy, well, he was scared. "This fight ain't nowhere near over," he said. "This guy's been waiting 20 years for one moment. He ain't about the rounds. He didn't come here to win a decision." They got very quiet. In between the 9th and the 10th rounds, he told Michael again, as he'd been telling him throughout, that he was doing great, that he was a champ. He also warned him for the 1000th time that Foreman was looking just for that one punch and that it was going to be a right hand. "The only way you can do it, Michael, is with your cooperation," Teddy said. "You must keep moving to your right. You can't pull it off if you keep moving to your right." In the 10th round, it was almost as if I could see the future before it happened. I could see the thoughts forming Foreman's mind. He threw a left hook, and I understood exactly what he was thinking. I screamed, "No!" It was just a throwaway hook. It wasn't going to end the fight or even hurt Michael, but it was thrown to stop Michael from moving to the place he needed to move. It was thrown to make him move the other way, and I screamed, "No!" because I saw it and I understood immediately. It was like a hunter shooting in front of his prey to make it move into an open field where his partner had a clean line and an unobstructed shot. It was weird to watch Foreman's reaction. His face lit up. He smiled almost. Then he did just what we had gone over in camp every day. He followed the left with the right. Bang! Just like that, the fight was over. The moment the punch landed and Michael went down, I was going up the steps to get into the ring. My guys grabbed me. They didn't understand it was over. "No, he's going to get up," the corner said. It looked like nothing, which is what I'd been saying to them all along, that it was going to look like a nothing punch. They were waiting for Michael to get up, thinking he would survive the round. Teddy knew better. There was no getting up. "This is over," he said. "He did it." They didn't understand. It didn't look like anything. "He'll get up." "No, Foreman did what he wanted to do," Teddy said. "Michael ain't getting up." He got angry afterwards at people who said that Michael quit. They didn't understand. Neither did the people who said Foreman got lucky. He didn't get lucky. He spent 20 years preparing to throw that punch, learning what he needed to get to that precise moment in time. When it landed, it was like pulling a plug out of a circuit. It was over, and Foreman knew it. Teddy knew it. And Michael, Christ, the force of the punch split his mouthpiece in half. It drove his tooth through his lip. Teddy said, "I'm not a protector of George. He doesn't need me standing up for him. But I believe in giving credit where it's due. He came prepared physically and mentally to be tortured and to endure, to be ready to do what he needed to do after all the punishment from a younger guy who could punch. Was that lucky? No, that was preparation. That was work. That was sacrifice." After the fight, Teddy got on the service elevator with Michael and Mike Bowman. It was just the three of them in this big steel box. Michael was holding a towel to his bloody split lip. Teddy had called ahead to a plastic surgeon because if Michael decided that he didn't want to fight again, he didn't want him having a scar. Suddenly Michael said, "Where is everybody?" Bowman looked at him, at this guy who normally had this huge entourage, and he said, "This is everybody." Michael nodded, taking that in, understanding what it meant. The World Heavyweight Championship victory with Double M presented the pinnacle of a storied training career for Teddy Atlas. He would go on to train other fighters following a lengthy hiatus from the ring, but he never quite emulated the heady experiences that training Mora afforded him, even though he'd go on to train heavyweight Alexander Povetkin to a WBA title win. Outside of the ring, Teddy would lend his considerable eye for talent to sporting broadcasting giant ESPN's Friday Night Fight series from 1998 to 2017. In terms of training fighters in recent years, Teddy has worked with the former WBC light heavyweight champion Alexander Gerdvik, as well as his work with Povetkin. Teddy's most famous association in recent years, however, came with the former world welterweight champion Timothy Bradley. This partnership was birthed when Bradley employed Teddy's services to assist him in preparing for a fight with the former lightweight king Brandon Rios. Bradley would halt Rios in the 9th round of their affair in September 2015. Despite the victory, the punches thrown by Bradley were not the talking point of the evening. Midway through the bout, Teddy unfurled an inspirational diatribe which spawned a lifetime of sound bites. In a bid to motivate the flagging Bradley in the corner, Teddy would enthusiastically impart the following wisdom. This is what he said. "Are you ready for the fire? We are firemen. We are firemen. The heat doesn't bother us. We live in the heat. We train in the heat. It tells us that we're ready. We're at home. We're where we're supposed to be. Flames don't intimidate us. What do? We control the flame. We control them. We move the flames where we want to, and then we extinguish them." Well, such hyperbole is the perfect quote to end such an adrenaline-filled life. Teddy Atlas is quite a man, and life's heat has sure indeed shown that he is one of boxing's greatest firemen. And that brings an end to part 4 and to the whole Teddy Atlas career profile. It has been an unbelievable story. I've really thoroughly enjoyed doing the Teddy Atlas career profile. You can understand now why we split it into 4 parts. All of the great stories from his early days trying to become a professional boxer, the injury that stopped him being a professional boxer, leading into his relationship, of course, as a trainer with Custody Amato, the whole Tyson saga. I mean, how many times have we heard that story from Tyson's perspective on his podcast, from Teddy himself on his podcast, and of course from his book, which was a great inspirational source for putting this story together. Some amazing quotes from there that we have used for this episode. So if you haven't read his book, please go and read the Teddy Atlas story. Atlas is a great tale of Teddy's life, and we hope we've been able to do this justice by providing you with his career profile on the BTR Boxing Podcast Network. It's been thoroughly enjoyable, and I must give a big shout out to Jamie Albrecht, of course, the co-host for the show. He has done a great job in putting the episodes together for us so that you guys can get a full and complete picture of Teddy Atlas. Now, of course, you might have heard Teddy Atlas himself speak about a lot of these things. You might have read his book, you might have watched it or listened to his podcast, but this is our version, this is our telling of Teddy Atlas's story, and we hope you've thoroughly enjoyed it. If you have, please do let us know. You can go on X, on social media, at career_profiles and tell us what you thought of it. You can also go on BTR Boxing Pod on X and let us know what you think about it. But everywhere else, it's just BTR Boxing Podcast Network, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. If you've watched/listened to this on the YouTube channel, thank you for leaving comments below previously, and make sure you leave a comment below to let us know what you think about the episode, but also let us know what you think about Teddy Atlas in general. We've really enjoyed doing this story, and we hope that splitting it down into 4 parts has made it so much more manageable for you guys to be able to listen to each segment of his story, each segment of his life. And Teddy continues, of course, he continues to be broadcasting, he continues to do his podcast. So if you enjoyed listening to his story, go and listen to him on his podcast. He's got some great stuff out there. It's been really great to have Teddy on. I did try to reach out to Teddy to see if he'd come on as a bit of an after show for this episode, because I felt it was so epic that I'd love to hear from him. I'd love to hear what his thoughts are on our retelling of the story and just elaborating on some of those points and some of those stories that we covered for this episode. Again, if you've enjoyed it, please go on and let us know. If you've been listening on Spotify, leave a comment below. A few of you have done it over the previous 3 parts. Please continue to do it to show other people what it's all about, that it's good, that it's a great retelling of a fantastic life story in Teddy Atlas. If for any reason you've not enjoyed the retelling of Teddy Atlas's career, please also let us know. We're always keen to improve our shows and get feedback on board from yourselves. So also let us know on that as well. If there's parts of it that you've not enjoyed, if you feel there could have been more parts in different elements, it would be great to hear from you. And please continue to support us. If you're a patron to the BTR Boxing Podcast Network on patreon.com, Thank you. We hope you've enjoyed all these episodes earlier than everybody else. We hope you've enjoyed them ad-free, and we hope you've enjoyed some of the additional content we have been starting to provide now Jamie's joined us on there. We've got some great stuff coming up, things like Ask Jamie Anything, the brutality of Jamie's comments. We've had some great questions from you guys on there as well. If you're not a patron and you can support us and you want to get additional content and you want to get episodes early and they're all being ad-free, then check us out at patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. If you're on Apple, make sure you leave a rating and a review. If you're on any other podcasting app, again, the same applies. If you can rate us and review us, please do so. It really is appreciated. And that is it for this episode. It's been an epic career profile on the life, the times, the stories of the great Teddy Atlas.